Okay, well, thanks very much, everyone, for turning up. I've really ad-libbed this the talk, so I'm doing it off the hoof. What I want to do is, rather than have all the books behind me in my Zoom, I want them in front of me. So what I've done is I've just compiled these books because they're kind of my influences and my anchors, apart from the practical, and they're my kind of my running order. So what I want to start with is this little video which Stuart and I have been trying to send, but unfortunately it didn't send. But I just went out in the garden about an hour ago, and I just took a little video of the compost. And the reason I'm showing you this is because I see artists as worms, compost worms. And so I just want to start with the compost, which I find very, very exciting. And these worms bring me incredible joy because they're so vital. The vitality of them they're so playful, and they love all the rubbish that comes in, and they just look so joyous, and they multiply, and they turn all the stuff we throw in into this amazing, beautiful stuff. So my analogy is these worms. So as an artist, as these worms. So I'm going to just play it. Hopefully, is that going to work? Oh, sorry. It's going to catch the window. Don't think that's good.
We can kind of see it.
Well, underneath all that, well, that wasn't very good, but in there is the vitality of all these worms, and I see the role of artists of working at the bottom, and basically artists are at the bottom anyway, so you might as well stay at the bottom. And so what I think is great about artists is they'll compost situations and circumstances and see them differently. So they'll engage with them creatively. And my work is really not about the individual so much. I mean, I see myself really as what as a facilitator, as creating a facilitated environment, as a guy called Winnicott would say, and that's about a group creative process. So my first book is Eleanor de Stanica, which is Homo Asceticus, and luckily for me, I have an email conversation with her, which is fantastic. And she's in America, Seattle she's in. Anyway, I mean, she's great because, and one of her other books is Art and Intimacy. And why I want to start with her is in Homo Asceticus, she says that Darwin was cleverly misquoted. So Darwin never said survival of the fittest. He actually said fit to survive together, fit to survive. That was his quote. So we've gone down this road of survival of the fittest and winner takes all. But actually that wasn't the point. The point was to be fit to survive together. And of course, in catastrophic change, especially at those moments, we have to be together in order to get through the unknown, the unfamiliar. And I'm going to put my hand up and say, I reckon we're kind of in those times, and in those massive transitional times. And so, and of course, what's a kind of reassuring is this isn't new. So humans have been here in this situation of circumstances where the unknown and fear and how do we get through this for for thousands of years. So this leads to my next book, which has been influenced, which is called Sacred and Profane, by a Romanian academic. And of course, people would, well, there's a load of prejudice in Europe about Romanians. So he's a Romanian academic, dead now, but amazing influence on me, Sacred and Profane. And so what I want to say is, what he points out in his book is that he talks about archaic cultures, and archaic cultures, what he said was they kind of tolerated linear time. So they didn't see, as we do, of progressiveness and it's going to get better and better. They saw that they sort of put up with linear time and sort of the sort of arduousness of every day. But when it got boring, when it got boring and it wasn't working for the group collectively, they said, hold on a minute, we should stop this because it's no longer working. And then what they did is they reenacted the beginning of time. And so what they did is they played, really. So it was about being playful. And what they did is they left everyday life and they created what would be called ritual, really, in the it's a loaded word nowadays, but in the past it would have been ritual, which I see as being playful. And by gathering as a group, and what Eleanor in her book Homo Asceticus talks about is making something special. So when they gathered, they would engage playfully with materials and each other, and they would make something special. And this helped to reanimate, when they went back to the everyday, that it was rejuvenated, and they had a sense of themselves and each other, and they could then re-relate to the everyday in a different context. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with my own work, but my own work is very much about being a maker. So I grew up rurally, and I was kind of using my imagination to make traps and catch things when I was like 10 to 13. And so I'd find materials and then make something to catch a bird or a fish or an eel or something like that. And then eventually I found carving wood at 13, which was a huge opening for me, because it opened up an internal world of emotion, relationship with emotion and imagination and the real world. And over a period of time, situations changed, and I was invited after I was a mature student when I went to St Martin's and did sculpture. And the biggest thing was context. So context of art for me was very troublesome, because I didn't feel I didn't fit in. And also I didn't see my work as sellable. So it was uncomfortable as a commodity. So what happened was, by chance, I met a very interesting woman who worked on housing. She was a housing estate officer. And she kind of thought laterally, and she was called Bill Rice. She died, unfortunately, a couple of years ago. But what happened was I was invited onto housing estates that had been neglected, and they were wild. They were wild places, and in a sense, no one really cared because they were sort of just not thought about. The only thing that was the landlord, the housing association landlord, of course, the costs were on maintenance, on vandalism, and the running costs were high. And they'd worked out that by bringing an artist in to work with, especially with the young people, that it would actually stop most of the costs on maintenance and through boredom, really, through the young people's boredom. Anyway, the point of that story is these young children and young teenagers, they taught me a lot because they were angry. They were very angry, and rightly so, I believe. And because they had been neglected, and in a sense, of course, young people have got all this vitality and creativity of abundance, all this incredible energy coming into new life. And if it's not met, of course, if it's not culturally engaged with and included and honoured and respected, it has to find another way out. It gets perverted. It gets distorted. So what was great is I met these young people. There's a big sort of group of sort of almost nomadic around the housing estates, hanging out and sort of kind of finding things to do. Now that's probably over 30 years ago, but funny enough, the last year or so, I've been really reflecting on those 30 years ago, and they seem more poignant now for me than anything of all the work in between. And the reason for that was that it was meeting these young people and then them testing me out and my colleague to see if we were up to scratch, and whether we would go with them with what their needs were. And because of my background, basically in rural setting, which was a lot of killing, a lot of destruction, and also a sort of creativity, ironically. And then through the carving, beauty, there was a sense of beauty. So what happened on these housing estates was we could meet them with their need. And so we made these massive structures, a bit like Wicker Man, out of, well, I was a tree surgeon at the time, so we had all this debris, and we could take all this bush down and make huge structures within a day. And the kids got into this, and hand over hand, slowly build these things within a day, and then there'd be these massive structures. But by the end of the day, they wanted to burn them down, so we'd make them, and then their vitality and their energy couldn't be stopped really, and so they just burnt them to the ground. And of course that would probably quite hard now today, because fire engines would turn up and be in the media and everything, but no one really bothered, no one really worried about it. And so we had these incredible moments together, and where we'd make this great thing, and then it would just be ashes by the end of the day. And we continued that. We did that. The repetition of relationship was really important. So we had a consistency, which is where the trust came from. So the trust came from that turning up regularly for months on end. We did every weekend, but we found it better to be every fortnight. And then every fortnight we would go down, and we'd have a group of young people waiting. So anyway, long story short, eventually I reduced that into an art practice, which was through the wood. So the art practice with wood and tools, so specifically tools like this, see this axe? So that's a side axe. And so what I love about this tool is, of course, it's got an edge. It's got a really sharp edge, And historically, you can imagine this tool has been both a weapon and a tool. And potentially today, it still has that capability. It's up to the human to make a decision. But this is a specific carpenter's tool. If you look, it's offset for a right-handed person, and that's offset to side axe. It's called a side axe, and it makes a plank before the saw. So it's pre-saw, this tool. Anyway, as an aesthetic tool, it's beautiful, because to work with this tool, there's an intimacy with the tree and the wood that is incredibly deep for me. It's an internal haptic loop with the wood and the tool, the hand and the sensitivity. So we took these tools and similar tools through a creative process with the young people, from destruction all the way through to creation. So we'd start with a massive tree trunk, and I mean they're big, they're like 5-6 ton, 20 foot long, 5-6 foot diameter. And by working like this, the destruction, you could allow the expression and then build relationship and build the sensuousness and the tenderness and then the beauty into the object, into the big benches that we made. And as a journey, it works really well. And I would still today say it's an excellent process. And what I'm interested about these is the methodologies go back thousands of years. So there's a somatic relationship that's really very, very, very old. I mean, in other words, the body memory, the hand, and the body memory is ancestral. It passes through the generations in relationship to trees and humans. And most people will be able to pick it up. So it's very accessible. That's where I wanted to get to next was Winnicott. So Winnicott's my next one, which is Playing in Reality, this book. Fantastic book. He's from Plymouth, funny enough, and that's where I was working on these housing estates. He's great, Playing in Reality. Now, he's not the only person, but the idea is that we only learn in play. So we only ever truly learn when we're playing, which is kind of a sad state of affairs if you think of how education's got. And our imaginations is thwarted in a sense that if we only learn through play, why aren't we playing? You know, why aren't we playing together? And I don't see play, I mean, play's been reduced, the word, to child and also very limited in the idea of play. But play is what Eleanor was talking about in Homo Asceticus, was that people get together to make something special, where that was all ages. So it's the youngest and the oldest. And so it wasn't discriminative on age or ability or who you were. The idea was you got together and you made creatively together to make something special together. And what I want to promote is that idea of how to learn differently, because rather than what we've still got is an education system which is based in Victorian idea of classroom, which is interesting that it's challenged with the COVID virus. I find that really fascinating that the classroom is now under threat, which is fantastic news, I think, because it means education has to break out of the Victorian high windowed room in rows sitting. And what we noticed that when we were working on parkland settings was that the curiosity was the education. So you'd have a great dialogue between the groups that gathered, and then the young people through and this is what Winnicott talks about, is youth-led, young person, child-led. So child-led, listening to the child's needs, and then as facilitating adults, you follow it, you follow with them and talk into their needs. And so the young people would be asked questions, and so they would ask questions about what we were doing, or something would come up in conversation. And by working like that, we were then directed by their curiosity, and then as a facilitated group of adults, we could talk into those subjects, and that's how we would explore education. And so it wouldn't just be one subject; it would be many subjects across the board. So I'd give an example of that was in Plymouth. Just before I'd come in, there had been some funding for a brand new playground, and what had happened was one of the contractors, when they put this brand new playground in, had said to some of the young people, "This is indestructible." So it's kind of a little great challenge, because then, of course, what they did was they went down the dockyard and they nicked a massive ship rope, you know, like, I don't know, what's that, 100 mil, 4-inch diameter rope. And then they tied it around the roundabout. They tied one end around the middle, and then they tied the other end to the top of the swings, and then they just wielded it in. So they just walked the roundabout, and of course they created a windlass, and they just ripped it right out of the gown in seconds. Yeah, no time at all. Perfect. Anyway, my point of that story is very, very creative. And also it's a great learning opportunity. So you imagine that as a learning opportunity. You've got history, windlass, you've got the Great China Wall, you've got cathedrals, you've got engineering, you've got maths, you've got physics, yeah, and you've got, it's all embodied in the child. The children have motivated themselves, and they've experienced it. So then they can really identify with any of those subjects you talk into. And then you've got pulley systems, if you double up a pulley, how it reduces the load, and so there's many levels of learning spontaneously. So that's what's very, very exciting, and it's playful, of course. It's enjoyable, and you don't really know where it's going to go. So it can go off in different tangents depending on different points of view or imagination of the young people. And then by doing that, they're learning without even learning. That's the beauty of it. There's no measuring of how well can you regurgitate what you've what I've told you. That's not the point. They've learnt from themselves, and they're witnessing each other learning as well, and different aspects. And also within that facilitated environment as adults, what you're noticing, which is my influence from Hillman, I had the opportunity to work with James Hillman. And so his influence would be that Soul's Code, so in his book Soul's Code, would be character and calling. And character and calling is the idea that you're looking for the character of that unique individual to come out. And as adults, what we're doing is we're looking, and you're seeing that beautiful gem, that stone, that shining out of that child. And of course, the child might present themselves within their, if you like, what we would call their dysfunction. So they might be really angry, and they might be wild, and they might be smashing everything up. But underneath that, if you're facilitated environment, you can look through that, and they know you're looking through, and you can see them. You can see them. And then the idea is, what I like is the Sufi quote, which is, you never see what's written on your forehead. And so the idea is you can tell them what you've seen written on their forehead. Sometimes, in fact, I've used that in some situations where I had to tell when the lad what was written was, he was dangerous. But it was a good thing in that context. But normally it's a positive thing. And you say, oh, did you notice that when you spoke to some adults or some police when they turned up, how authoritative you were in your voice? And of course they go, what, but it's never forgotten. And then you can work on that. If you're still in relationship, you can work on those little beautiful, unique parts of character and bring them out. And then what hasn't happened very much because of funding, basically, is what they call within funding is exit strategies. So that, you need to be able to say, what are your exit strategies? In other words, when you leave, what are you going to leave behind when you're gone? Now, ideally, exit strategies would be that you could redirect some of these young people to more authoritative mentoring. So that's where I would like to see education, is that you would find mentors. So I don't like volunteers. I really don't like what volunteering is, I'm afraid, because it is always at the cost of someone's expertise and someone's wage. So, but there's a place for elders and eldership in the sense of mentoring these young people. And that's the combination of old and young. You can bring them together instead of this distortion of the neglected old and the neglected youth, is you bring them together and the old can mentor the youth. Now, that might seem, for old people, they feel, why would I want to bother? I'm not interested. But funny enough, the richness from the youth to the elder is as much. So the older person will gain as much as the young person. So it's exponential in its generosity, in its abundance. So I've gone off on a tangent, really, because I wasn't going to talk about any of this, but that's where I've gone. So that's what's happened, is that I really see an opportunity to break art, which is what Hillman had said to me, get art out of the institutions, get art out into the everyday. And in a sense, that's what I've tried to do, is get art out into the everyday. which is creativity and imagination, really. And I'm still doing that. So where I've ended up is thinking of the system we're all caught in, which is this idea of progress and the climbing the ladder academically, climbing the ladder financially, materially, and powerfully. So really, I see artists can challenge that, like the worms in the compost, because there's nothing. How can we stop all that power and that speed? Mentioning speed, I want to bring in Viriello. Here he is, Paul Viriello. Now, that his books, he's a great guy. So he was an Italian refugee at 8 years old. And so he was an Italian in Paris. And he went to his favorite toy shop in the morning in Paris at 8 years old. And in the afternoon, he went back and it was gone. The whole street was gone. And he said that's what made him a philosopher. He's about 84 now, and he's just moved out of Paris and lives in La Rochelle, looking out at the ocean. Anyway, very early, he's a fantastic guy, because he says where this arrogance has come from was the invention of the elevator. So he said the speed of the elevator going up has brought in this arrogance of looking down, and also the fact we can elevate so quickly, some of us. And he sees that what the most threat is speed, and of course we're under challenge of speed within the sense of the environmental changes, and the challenge to the resources and how we consume. So our systems, capitalism, I call it capitalism anymore, but the idea of resourceful use to increase wealth is a cost, and it's never depleted. It always needs more input. And so what I'm interested in is the fallout. And so where I see the fallout is, ironically, it's the majority of people. So the majority of people are going to have less in a sense of wealth, in a sense of money. And so what I'm interested in is, like the worms and the compost, is that what humans can do together when they're at the bottom, if you like, with the resources. And of course, the resources are the materials that are no longer are rejected. So all the waste products, all the broken things. So where I'm interested now is all the things that are available at the bottom, and how creatively to engage with those. And so I think I've missed all my slides, Stuart, but could you do the gate? Could you do the gate one, the little video? Because this is a gate which costs nothing. Okay, so that gate came about, as you can make it, costs nothing. It's all made from scrap. Even the posts are oak. They are chainsawed out. They're not. I didn't buy those posts. And of course the gate is there because it's the neighbours. But I wanted just to talk about that latch. So that latch came about from a need, because the two little grandchildren next door, they could put their hand through and open the bolt when it was a little bolt, and then they'd run off down the road. So I just thought about how to overcome that problem. And of course, there's the style gate for horses, when they can lean over their horse and open the latch. So I thought about that, and then I looked at how to do that. And then what I'm interested in with materials and skills, dexterity with these and imagination, is unconscious competence. So Funny enough, I'm going full circle. Stuart, can you just show those rope ones now? Thanks. Okay, now the reason I show you those is just because of this idea of unconscious competence. So when someone becomes really dexterous with skills, hands and materials, it's embodied memory. So like me with those ropes, I've learned that off it was actually an ex-father-in-law who was at sea all his life. And he jumped ship in New Zealand just out of interest. But he taught me those. And you could do them with your eyes closed. I could do them in the dark and with my eyes closed. So what's interesting, if we're at the bottom, and yet we learn dexterity, if we learn confidence with material, with our resourcefulness. So I changed this title of my talk called to Playfulness, Resourcefulness, and Togetherness. And I think I've covered the playfulness bit, but the resourcefulness is the ability to make, really, and to make in any sense of the word. In other words, to be able to have a very deep vocabulary of hand skills and material, relationship materials and tools. Because then what happens is that it opens the possibility, once there's a confidence, to pick up any materials and make something out of rubbish, basically, like those worms in the compost. So I'm back to that gate that I made, that latch. And this is where the reanimation comes in, because the reanimation, that gate is made out of rubbish. It was all from a scrap heap, and the handle that is carbon sprung, and that's from a handbrake out of a very old car that was. I live on an old estate, and the Lord used to have a big old Daimler or something. Anyway, it was kept in the barn, and all the bits of the car were just scrapped, and I kept that spring. It's a piece of handbrake, but when they were not a cable but a bar, so it's probably over 100 years old. But because it's carbon, it's got a spring in it, so that became the handle. Which, if it wasn't carbon sprung, it wouldn't hold that tensile steel. And then the curved bit is from garden shears from cutting grass. You just cut a piece out and then drilled a hole and put a point on it, and then knocked it into the post. So the point is that the resourcefulness from rubbish, and if there's a narrative with that. In other words, that gate now has a lot more meaning for people, because the context that it was a friend of mine's old gate, a friend of mine's grass cutting shears, and it's from it was called Knight Bruce's old car. And all of a sudden, if you pick up these pieces of rubbish, they have stories within them. And so if people have their own pile of rubbish, they get to know, they can tell stories into those bits. And then when you put them together in a different context, they come together reanimated. And what I would compare that to is the idea of how a butterfly is made, because who would have thought a little grub then to a chrysalis would end up like a butterfly? That seems like impossible. And so my context for this idea of picking up stuff that no one no longer wants is to playfully imagine how to put them together resourcefully to make something that doesn't cost anything. You see, it replaces something. And also what happens then is you can change a culture, because you can change a culture from consuming and getting into debt, which then you're trapped. Because if you have the resourcefulness to just pick up stuff for nothing and make it. And the key word is together. It's not necessarily an individual thing. It's about collective, because that's where the harmony is. Anyway, that's where I'm at. So that last gate is where I'm at. So I'm reducing myself down to the bottom, which is naturally happening anyway. And I don't have to try at that. And it's picking up the pieces. And that within that realm of, if you like, loss of status, loss of power, loss of income, this is what's coming, remember. I mean, it's not just coming to me, it's coming to a lot of people very soon. But you lose all those things, and it's a massive de-acceleration. The speed of coming down is going to be so high impact. So that massive impact of coming down so fast and letting go of all those values, supposedly, what seems important. And as we come down together, the importance, the thing is, rather than watch each other fall aside, you know, because I experienced that myself. You see someone get ill and you feel sorry for them or you wish them well, but actually as Leonard Cohen said, we're all floating on our own orange boxes, you know, through the flood. So the tendency is to let someone sail on by and you're just holding on to your own floating orange box. It's just that idea of resourcefulness and togetherness, really, but as in play. And I suppose just to end on that is that how beautiful that is. It's a really magic thing. So ironically, it's better than what we're sold, personally. Okay, if there's any questions, that's me done. Thanks.
Have you ever studied play in terms of the play cycle and what they're actually teaching people that are play workers in this day and age? Because it sounds like you have, but I just wondered if you had picked up any books about the play cycle and recapitulative play.
Yeah, no, I haven't. I think it was just a creative process, and I think where I could hone it, what was a gift, and it was a wonderful opportunity, was when I was at St Martin's, really, because it was the end of an era, Central St Martin's, when I was doing sculpture, because basically they left you to it, and so those first 3 years, it was up to you how you engaged with materials. And so it was just that lostness and finding a way in with materials, and then being playful and also the unknown. So I think my playfulness comes from art. I mean, just out of, this is a side, but what really influenced me was the American abstract expressionists, really. I mean, that's where I felt akin, was because they were playing with the unknown. They were going into the unknown depths of things. And, you know, a favorite quote would be Jackson Pollock's was, I paint because I find what I'm about. I see what I'm about. So by engaging and by having that dialogue, I know they call it a haptic loop, you know, the internal and external, and then that hand over hand, that relationship by a dialogue. So you do something, it has a visual response, you internalize the feeling, and then you repeat it, and slowly you've got a movement. To animate, really, to reanimate. And so I've just done a tree job with my daughter, and we basically named every log, you know, and talked to them and put them on the trailer. And now it's going to be hard because Cicely said, how's little Croc doing, little crocodile? And so it's going to be really difficult to put Croc on the fire pile, because we've got to bring Croc in there, because Croc's got to live with us.
Can I suggest, James, that we have a look at some of the slides, because they do illustrate what you were talking about earlier. And there's some. Right. I mean, if we go from the one about making community, that's probably
all right.
One of the older
Thank
ones.
You. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, this is a destruction. You see, young people, young men, especially. It was a way of allowing that vitality. this is the idea, a bit like Cinderella, really, the ashwork, and burning something, destroying it, but then bringing it back, bringing it back, finding new beauty. This was a mother and daughter, so they worked together, learning this, to use this in shave. It's just one of those moments of how to get used to hands and tools. This is in Plymouth Whitley, and just the idea of working in young people's own settings. So you work in the everyday, and then through curiosity, making a relationship. We made some benches. They're the winged buzzard backs. This was Cranbrook, and then just working alongside is a really good way of learning, because through dialogue comes naturally, just by people being together, and then by doing something, inhibitions are less, and so you start to have conversations that are more intimate. This was way back on those housing estates 30 years ago. The whole family's meeting. I found a grass patch. So this is the one at Cranbrook again, and just the great achievement, and working together, all different characters, and playing and making, and working as a team. So you'll see the structure of this shelter. So we're lifting that. I mean, there's hours of work gone into those poles. They're oak, and they've done 3 or 4 months work probably before we get to this stage. And there it is. So they made that. And what's great is they're ready to go. Those young people want more. So where that is the end of the project, they're ready. This is just the beginning. They want to keep going. And of course we couldn't keep going. Is this going to play? So this is what's happened to me lately. I've done away with all combustion engines, and I do all my tree work now by hand. So gone back 100 years or more. But what's interesting is the technology's allowed me to do that, because the Japanese have invented these new saws using a computer, and you don't need a chainsaw anymore. You watch the speed of this saw. So that it's with ease. So I could dismantle these trees, had to come down, unfortunately, Monterey cypress, but the sticky has got a lot of sap in that. But that saw is transforming. So it's made by a computer. Teeth are totally very sophisticated, and then I can do that by hand, which is that's probably 10, 11 inches, but I did a 2-foot one with that one. Okay. Is there any questions?
Hi, James. There's so much in what you're talking about today, and so much is familiar, but there's new ground to cover. I loved what you were saying about the young people, how you began where the young people were at on the estate, and when you opened yourself to their reality, they were able to step into themselves in a way, and there was a process that was possible through the art making that went from destruction to creation. Jumping ahead to another image that really sticks with me is that wonderful Leonard Cohen, we're all floating on our own orange cartons. And that really is an image for our time. And thinking then forward too to the what's possible in terms of making in the time of COVID. I mean, the processes you've described in a way are processes that they're processes of intimacy. They're into me, see. I learned about myself. I learned about you. As a community, we come together and we grow. But in a time of the necessity for physical distancing and the necessity for not creating aspirated air or for not aerosoling the air out into the world through sheer physical effort or even through joy, how is it that we find that intimacy, and how is it that we create together now? I just invite you to riff on that for a moment. I don't care if you get it right. What's your thinking?
Well, I mean, what's governed our work over the years, which has been really, I mean, people think it's a bane, which is HSC, but actually HSC is really useful. I tell you, health and safety executive, because if you write risk assessments and methodology statements, like by law, once you've done those risk assessments and methodology statements, that gives you the sort of the legal right once you've got the insurances. So a lot of my work has been with authorities, and of course authorities are obviously rightly so, they want you up to scratch with your insurances and or your risk assessments, and more and more so hyper vigilant. So they have to be spot on. You know, you have to do loads of risk assessment. You have to do loads of methodology statements on digging a hole, for example, to put a post in. There's a whole process and different methodology statements. Now, we had a project postponed because of the COVID, and we're going to go back in at end of August, but it's still possible. I mean, you're right with the exertion thing of more breath, but I still see it's much more feasible to work outside, because we can do 2 meter distance. It's true, you're not as close, but I can write a risk assessment where we can still work as a group, probably not as big, or we'd have to stretch out to a bigger area where we can still accommodate this sense of working alongside. It's tentative, I would say. So in other words, it's a new unknown, but it's much more practical than in a classroom. That's what I would say.
And may I just have a quick follow-on? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So the follow-on, James, would be that I'm certain that the intimacy of making and co-making and making through play is possible, despite the fact that we have to physically distance. So I guess the question I have is, what is the opportunity of this time?
Well, I'm up against it personally. I mean, but the thing is, as things come down, and the idea of scarcity and resources, you know, I mean, I think the problem is at the moment is generally we're all trying to scramble back up, you know, money, pay the bills every month, pay the mortgage, you know. So there's this sort of mashes. The speed of life prevents us from slowing down. But I can see that being really challenged, that speed for the majority of us, you know, without power and wealth. So that's when it comes down. But I don't know the answer to that, because at the moment everything's based on money, and we're all caught in that. But I think what could be interesting is this idea in the UK, which has happened with this idea of the furlough, which of course I'm self-employed, so I'm not part of that. But what's interesting is this idea, which had been put forward before COVID, was the idea that you pay someone a basic wage, you pay someone a monthly annual wage, you know, and it's across the board. And of course that up until COVID, that was kind of, I mean, people were in conversation about that, but actually it wasn't. It was dismissed generally. But all of a sudden, I think this is probably a door to another way of economically funding society, because if you allow that, I mean, I could be very cynical in the sense that who wants to let that creativity out because it's too scary for control. But if you pay someone a basic minimum wage, not a minimum wage, you pay someone a wage, or a fund, then, because the fact is with the AI, you know, that's another aspect of the lack of need for humans. And okay, one way is kill them all off, but if we're here, is how to employ in the larger sense of bring us together and use our vitality. And so I can see maybe a transition where, I mean, personally, I'd hope to get away from money altogether, like, you know, and money's just in the way, you know, it's a control method. But, and of course, I think what I'm trying to get back to those worms in that composter is that if we think creatively at the bottom and compost, we can show another way. And very, very quick analogy was we were in an island, Faviana, years ago, off Sicily, and Nick had seen in a local brochure it was what do they call it? It was a group of yachts. We're going to have a regatta, right? Anyway, we went along in the evening, and it was just it was just getting dark, and there was a very light wind and a calm sea. And what it was grandfathers and children with their really old little sailing boats, and they're only like 15 foot long and beautifully remade and put together with loads of love. And they would come in this little harbour, circle round, and then go out. And there was probably 25 boats, and they were just inherited, and all ages work in it was a magical moment. But what was interesting in that harbour was it was probably a multi-million-pound yacht, right or moored up, and on it was a family, 2 children and parents with some servants, and they were eating a big meal. But what was interesting was the difference, because the children were on that boat, because they were only like 20 foot away from us, and they were really uncomfortable because they were so from my point of view, they were so undernourished, whereas the whole of that community was very nourished by the simplicity of their little boats and the love and the care of them. And there was no money involved. You know, we didn't have to buy a ticket or anything, just turn up. And that, for me, that was a very good example of what can happen at the bottom. And also it can become very attractive to the top, because actually it's full of life and full of joy, full of play and full of togetherness. And so what's interesting is the top could really influence the bottom could really influence the top. Anyway, that's my hope.
Hi James, nice to see you again.
Yeah.
Out at Organic Arts, we're doing our best to not use power tools or anything, but the one thing we've struggled with is cutting down trees. So I'm just wondering if you can tell me where there's a source.
Yeah.
Japanese saws, where we can get them from.
They're called silky saws, all right? So there's just one brand. And I did meet the guy who's got the franchise, which was a very clever move by him, probably about 10 years ago. But if you look on silky saws, I wouldn't go, I mean, I can't say that. No, what can I say diplomatically? Look around for prices, because they vary, okay? But there's a whole range of saws made by Silky, okay? And you'll get exactly what you need.
So how do you spell silky?
Silky, I think. Yeah, Silky.
Okay.
Yeah, Silky Fox or something it's called. But there's a whole series of them, and they're phenomenal things. They're expensive,
Yeah.
but but they'll cover all tree use.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everything now. Yeah. Yeah.
Lovely. Thanks very much.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
Oh, go ahead.
Hi, Jane. Hi.
Hi. I just wanted to, make a comment really about what you were saying, because I found it all very inspirational and thought-provoking. I've been in sort of continual isolation really since about March, and I did get the virus, but as you see, I survived.
Well, gosh, well done. Yeah.
But actually, when I first got it, I didn't quite know what it was, and I was reading all about the immune system. Really nice book, and we're always taught that it's like fighting, you know, we get invaded by viruses, blah, you know, all these things, and the immune system fights, you know, sends all these warriors and you know, white cells and things to fight. But in actual fact, he said, actually, this isn't true. The immune system is a system of harmony. And we need certain things in our bodies, like, you know, you could say bacteria or whatever, but the immune system doesn't go and fight. It just gets rid, lets things in, and absolutely anything can get in our bodies, actually, which shocked me when I read it all. But the immune system is it keeps the good baddies, if you know what I mean, and lets the bad baddies go. So, and I was thinking about that in relation to what you were saying about society. I mean, there are certain aspects of society that, you know, if you look with a sort of binary look, good, bad, you could say are bad, but actually they're not bad. It's how we look at them.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
You could say, you know, like the gang culture, you know, gangs, okay, they're bad, but actually the reason they're gangs is because they want to be together for a reason. And they have no positive way of being together, these young people. So those are things that came up for me in what you were talking about.
Yeah.
So that's my comment. But thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jane.
Okay.
I think that's thanks a lot. I mean, I create my own prejudice as well. Yeah, I'm othering people as well. I think what's interesting, what you said about young people that aren't met in a sense of seen by society, is the vitality and creativity that we miss out on. Like, and I say we, I mean collectively, because there's a huge resourcefulness. And I mean, Michael Mead reckon one of his quotes is that you're always 2 degrees off, which I wish I was only 2 degrees off. But if he said you're always 2 degrees off the course you need to be on. And I think with young people, as adults and facilitating, you can show them those 2 degrees, really. You can just sort of tweak it. And I mean, you know, like Hillman always talks about tacking, you know, solves code. You're tacking on course and then you're off course. But then you know when you're on course, so you have a moment of being on course. And then, of course, as an artist, we you know, that those are great moments, because you go, oh, then I was really on course. But then, of course, you're off course again, and then you're trying to tack back on. But of course, everything's changed. It isn't the same place you're trying to get to. You're evolving, and you're getting to some other place that you didn't even imagine you'd get to. So there's a lot of trust involved with that. And I think that's with young people, is the worst thing is this sort of neglect, really. I think that that's the you know, it's neglect. I mean, I used to work with young people, and I used to call it spoiled neglect, because what was happening was materially they had everything, you know, in a sense of all the new gadgets, but actually emotionally, psychologically, and intimately with relationship, they were totally neglected. And that was, you know, it's a huge grief. There's huge grief in that. There's a huge grief, and then the pain of that grief, and of course not being able to express that grief, only in reaction to anger and pain, is a huge cost to all of us. And yet we can meet that and all benefit by that amazing abundance of vitality and creativity that's youth are bringing back in. I mean, I know Michael Mead used to say in one of his books that tribal cultures were always so excited to see a young baby born in the tribe, because it was an ancestor coming back, and the ancestor that was coming back was going to remind them something they'd forgotten as a collective. So it was like, oh, who's come back, and who is it? Because what are they reminding us that we've forgotten as a culture that we need to remember again? And so, I mean, you can take that however you want to believe it or not, but as the idea of that new life, of new generation and new vitality of creativity, if we're curious enough to engage and go, well, what have you got, you know, what you're bringing, what's your interest? Of course, that's the rejuvenation of the society in that new life, rather than robotically telling them to fearfully repeat what they've ingested, so machine-like, to become slaves. And that's how I see a lot of education, I'm afraid, to fit into the systems. So I'm very cynical, as you can tell, because it's not about the individual child, hardly at all, I would say. There you go.
Yeah, I just, another thing I found was I have done some work with, they call them teenage parents, groups of teenagers that couldn't continue with their education because of having children. We did a lot of art projects with them. But the thing that really stood out for me was one day we took, this is when I was working and living in Portsmouth, we took them to the Tate Modern, and they came along, some of them with the fathers and their babies and everything, and we all went on a coach up to the Tate Modern from Portsmouth, and they'd never been to an art gallery, any of them, in their lives. And me and the other person that was going, there was another artist, we didn't know how they were going to respond, really, but they were amazed and they were so enthralled by what they got to see, actually. And when they came back, they wanted to do things, to make things, you know, because what they saw, I can't even remember what it was now, but it really inspired them. It didn't have an adverse effect. They didn't say, oh, I could do that, you know. They really took it all on board, and they really enjoyed it. And yeah, I mean, doing that work with them, I learned such a lot. Actually, it was very humbling in a way.
Yeah.
I felt, God, I had all these prejudices and all these preconceived ideas about people. And these young people, you're talking about a baby coming into the world, their children were so beautiful. I mean, they were lovely. You know, they were babies and they were gorgeous. It was just very moving, actually. And I thought, and there'd been all this horrible stuff on the television about young people and having babies and that. And I thought, God, I mean, having a baby, that's the most normal thing in the world, for God's sake. We've all been babies, haven't we, for crying out loud. Anyway, that was just me being, I don't know what. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, the influence of art, yeah. Yeah, what made me think as well was the other end was the older people as elders, because what's great about practical tasks is that you can try to learn something, and if you've got that continuity of learning practical things, which, you know, they always say the First World War was the massive devastation of the longevity of inherited skills, because it was severed, which before that time, the relationship, I know factories and land, but the relationship through the skills was passed on from generations. And so what I think is valuable as older people is that tempering of character of a youth, and as you get older as well. But the idea that just by watching someone do something, an older person can say, if you just turn it that way a little bit more, or if you just hold it like a spoke shave, if you hold it just that way a little bit, it'll bite better on the blade or something. And just that little bit of input can where that young person would take maybe hours or maybe years to get to know or to learn, it can be immediately learnt within a second, which would have taken years if they hadn't had that older person to just nudge them, if you like, or just put in a little bit of input. And that, I mean, I know, the idea is that we don't take on stuff when we're young because we have to find out the hard way. But the practical is quite useful in a sense of that, is that it's not just a philosophy, it can actually be seen to make the difference. So if you can apply an older person advising on a tool use or learning a skill, there's a trust that's made between the young person and the old person, because the young person can apply it and then see it does make a difference, and therefore what the older person saying wasn't just bullshit or whatever, or hierarchy. But from that point of view, then you could move into a philosophy. You can move into a way of how to be in a way of life, because the trust is being made on that initial connection. Whereas if you spout a theory or a concept, where do you get, like fake news? Where do you start knowing if it's truthful or not?
I wondered if I could ask you on this theme, kind of where you see your kind of your own career, your own thing kind of moving, because obviously you're also getting older, so your abilities to manage enormous trees and things like that, it's going to change over time. But within that, I wondered whether there had been a capacity for having conversations with people you've worked with previously, whether you've kind of re-encountered anyone that you've worked with from before, and whether there's something in that, kind of that passing down of knowledge, and whether those people might be involved in something in the future, and whether that would be the way forward, is this kind of informal knowledge exchange.
Yeah, very good question, Stuart. Well, when you do projects, you're meant to always do those before and after assessments. I hate all that shit. But anyway, I've never really done it at the cost of my own funding. But what's interesting at long term is that, I'll give you some examples. So I was in Europarts about a year ago getting some oil filters, and the lad who served me, who was like 6 foot something, he said, he saw my name, and he said, I worked with you about 15 years ago. He said, it made a big difference to me, and so that's some feedback. And then there was another lad who I'd worked with, say 5 or 6 years later, after he'd worked on a project in a park, and he said to me, the only safe time in my life was the weekends that we worked with you. He said, because it was a boundary space, I knew I wasn't going to get hurt, and I didn't know that, and that was 5 or 6 years later after that experience. And so those are the sort of key things that people, organizations, funders, local authorities, they don't realize the long-term effect, and it is hard to qualify or quantify. And then another one would be a father who was a child on one of my projects, brought his 2 kids along to a project. So there's but what you're saying is true. Is one of my hands is swollen, and it's been swollen since I damaged it really badly in February, and it's still not right. And so my physical abilities becoming more and more restrictive. And of course, ideally, I would be, and you would have all the generations lined up. So my generation, middle-aged, and then the youth, and just to tell you, I did have an experience of that when the tribe from Vancouver Island came over, the New Chau Nu, and when the New Chau Nu came over to Exeter Museum, they invited me to work with them. And of course, when they came over as a tribe. So the chief came over, and the smallest, the children, and they came as a tribe, and they work as a tribe. So they worked together, all the ages, and they worked on that totem pole. And I was lucky enough to work with them. Totally different way of working than Western carving. But the point of that was that holistic way of inclusion and sharing. and then the master carver obviously is then holding the space, the facilitated environment on that totem pole for the little ones to be able to have the courage and the skill to feel confident. They had their own knives. The little ones, 5-6-year-olds, had their own little set of knives. So that's, for me, that was an amazing moment, because it was exactly what I aspire to. But where I feel myself is very fragmented. So I'm very fragmented in a sense of contact and funding and everything. So where I see us going is resourcefulness, I've had to reflect at my age and then think of all the skills I've got. So like those carpet bags, I've got a photograph of that, or that little film of those carpet bags. I made those 35 years ago in New Zealand out of old bits of carpet. And of course, those carpet bags probably last 2-3 generations. But what I suppose what I know is that is, as my age, what resources have I got to hand back? And I've got a lot. I've got, like, and also when you're in an environment of trying to sell yourself, which is supposedly what we're all meant to do now, we're all sort of competing with each other and selling ourselves. It's very hard to put into words how great I am. I'm great. But if you show the practical, it's kind of. There was a tutor of mine at St Martin's, and he said, I question making sculpture anymore. I say, well, make many more objects. And he said, well, just think of a fruit tree. It bears fruit, but not everyone picks the fruit. Pavera, he was called. And I suppose that's the thing, is as my age, is that I offer my resources, and that's where I'm going. So I'm going to sort of do resourceful experience training, if you like, and just say, well, this is what I've got to offer. And I don't know, apart from that.
Are you running any workshops anytime soon?
No, I did that, the Trusted Bond. I ran a workshop and it went really well. People came from different parts of the country, but it wasn't cost effective. I was knackered. I was burnt out after I did it. And it was not cost effective. I was in debt after that workshop. And also the problem with running workshops, if it's money, is you get the people that can afford it turn up. And so you're immediately limiting your immediately limiting your audience, your experience. And that was the beautiful thing about the parks and the housing estates, is in a way everyone was included. So people could come and go, and also always be included. And then you get a much more diverse group of experience and meeting people that you would never normally meet. And so I'm troubled with workshops, and it was good. It was a great experience, and the workshop went really well. And I think people got out what I was hoping they would. But it was limited in the sense of, like I say, costs, but also an elitism. There's an elitism in it.
That's kind of feeding into something I was thinking about. I really like that idea. Like we're always saying, the top 1% will drag the bottom up, where actually it's a lot better if the bottom can drag the top down.
Yeah.
And everyone will be a lot happier.
Yeah.
So with these workshops, what if you looked at it in a way that you just did get the elite?
Yeah.
If it was just very expensive.
Yeah.
And what you're actually doing is showing them what the bottom is.
Yeah. I know.
Because we got to drag the bottom down.
The top down.
Top down, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, thanks, Hugh. Yeah, that's really, I agree. Stuart's just told me a couple of weeks ago about, I guess it's I guess it's an app or something, but pay what you can. I think is that what it's called, Stuart?
Oh, that was just a way of operating. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, like crowdfunding and stuff, I think that maybe is the way forward. Unfortunately, I'm not very skilled on all that stuff, but I think you're right. It's more inclusive, and also the idea of Stuart's suggestion is, I think it's something called like pay what you can, and the idea that then you could pool the money and include, what you pay, and so not people aren't kept out because they can't afford it.
Can I add into that conversation, James? I love that idea of the inclusiveness, making it accessible to any kind of level of funding. And I guess what I'd also say is that comment you made earlier about the unconscious competence could equally be termed as the unconscious deficit, and not as a judgment. Just as, the story you told about the family on that fabulous cruising ship while all the small boats sailed around the harbor, the mother and father on that boat may not have known what they were missing. The children may have had some kind of emotional sense of what they were missing, or even the beginning seedlings of shame, and not even knowing why they were there. So that if your workshops are made accessible to that top 1% or to that sort of higher end of society in a way that enables access to the kind of love and relationship and making and play and transformation that as artists we've discovered at the bottom of the barrel, if you like. I mean, that's quite radical, isn't it? It's offering something of ourselves that also in a way makes us vulnerable, but may offer something back into the wider society as a result. Giving people an opportunity to say, without judgment, without fear, and without shame, to explore what it is that they've always sensed was missing and couldn't find, no matter how rich they became. Yeah.
I mean, Michael Means said to me once, is reassurance. That's the problem of getting people to come in, is to reassure them to take the risk. I'm not very good at it, but I'm good at it on a hazard estate, but I'm not good on how to market that in a sense of reassurance. It's worth getting involved. But what I do like about what you're saying is, what I know the richness is that diversity and how much is gained from having a really wide spectrum, opportunity to meet people you'd never normally meet, and how creative that is, because you don't know. You've got that unknown, a sense of what's the word? I had it then. Serendipity. The serendipity of the moment. And it's creating environments where people feel they're reassured that they can take the risk to come in and then be together with people they wouldn't normally meet. I'm very excited by that idea.
Ace, well, if we don't have any more questions, thank you very much, James. That was great.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thanks for turning up. Lovely to see you all. Thanks. Bye.